Greetings to you, and it's a pleasure to be online today again, believing that you all will come across this recording and will do the needful. First is the fact that I am yet to still have you people, and I want to believe that when you see this lecture, you will notify other members of the class about it. And like I have always said, if you have a class WhatsApp group, kindly add me up so that we can discuss further on what time is most convenient for this lecture. As I see that a lot of you are not always online, even though this is one of the sessions that we deemed fit to handle rapidly so as to catch up with the classes we have lost. So this is not the official timing of the lecture, but it is only necessary that we do it at this point because we had some challenges from the very beginning with the site, with our network issues as well. But since all that has been resolved, I urge us all to kindly view these videos, add me to your WhatsApp group, and bring up your questions so that we can all discuss and be on the same page before your exams. So this is basically the third lecture we'll be having in this course, P8326. My name is Dr. Uja, and my WhatsApp line is 08036113243. As has always been the culture of this course in previous sessions, we emphasize on the WhatsApp arrangement owing to the fact that students find it most convenient, and then they always come up with questions at any point in time, and I'll be available to attend to them all, as many as you bring up. And it helps us prepare better for your exams and all. So I think this session shouldn't be anything different from what has been the practice before now. So having said that, in the previous class, we looked at what formal and informal organizations are. And from the very beginning of the class, we're able to establish an adequate enlightening process to show the historical background of what administration is and how organizations have evolved over time. We looked at theories that sought to explain organization from various perspectives. And we also looked at various scholarly postulations on the best form of administration or the best aspects through which organizations have managed their affairs internally and externally. And in yesterday's lecture, in the last lecture, we were able to look at what formal and informal organizations are. And okay, I'm glad to have Sabu Aminu. Yes. Sabu Aminu, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. When you can hear me, please, I'll be willing to hear from you so that we can discuss how best to get other members of the class involved. Like I said earlier on, if there's a WhatsApp group, you kindly add me up, and if there's none, you try to set up one so that we can all agree on the best time to have this lecture. So, in the last class, our discussion and emphasis was on formal and informal organization. And we were able to establish the fact that formal organizations exist for different reasons, as well as the informal ones as well. So we were able to see various views on the strengths and weaknesses of formal organizations, ranging from the issues of leadership to the issues of how best information flows in these various organizations. And we were able to also see clearly that there are command types that exist in an organization. We looked at the board type and we looked at the bureau type. And it all boils down to how effectively information flows within an organization. And we said that in the formal type, okay, I'm having another Francesca Uchechi. This is wonderful. Okay, so we're able to establish the fact that the board type of administration has different elements and different departments that play various roles in terms of how information flows. And we looked at the issues of administrative board, and their advisory roles that they play. And the other aspect, which is the bureau type, we saw how well information and leadership is vested in a single individual or have a streamlined structure, and they all tend to reflect the differentials between formal and informal organization that we try to look at. So in today's lecture, our emphasis would be on public enterprises. And let me share my screen with you so that we'll be able to see what we are to discuss today. Okay, if any of you can hear me, can you please speak up? And then let's discuss the way forward on how to get other members of the class involved, because the email addresses that I have relating to this course has not been going through. Most times when emails are sent out, more than 80% of it returned as failed emails. So if any of you can hear me, Francisca or Aminu, you can unmute yourself. Speak.
Yes, sir, I can hear you, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. So how best do we get other members of this class involved so that everybody will be carried along? Do you have a class WhatsApp group?
Yes, sir. I think we have. We have one.
Okay. Please, you should inform the admin of the group to add me up, and then so that we can all discuss and agree on a particular time that would be most convenient for this lecture. Okay, so from the first class, we looked at various theories.
I don't think we have. We don't have.
Okay.
We don't have any group. We don't have. Any...
Okay. If you don't have any group, can you create one and then inform other members of the class? I think you have been sharing other lectures with them, so you should know them better than me.
Okay, sir.
I think gradually they are getting the information about it. There is another person online now. Okay, so in today's class, our emphasis would be on public enterprises. And you know, when you hear public enterprises, there are various meanings to it. And from a layman's perspective, one can easily establish an understanding of what it is. Most especially when you hear the name public, it means it is collectively owned. It means it is to serve the interests of the populace. It means it is not in the hands of private individuals, and it would therefore mean that the purpose for establishing a public enterprise is not I apologize for the constant network interruptions we've been experiencing. And I really wish there's a better way to handle this because I have different network sources here and I don't know why it keeps going off and on. Okay, so I was saying that when one hears the idea of public enterprises and the reason for the establishment, even if you are not a scholar of public administration, there are certain things that come to mind when you hear something is described as being public. It therefore means that it is owned by the government in most cases, or the government controls a larger share of it, and it is established precisely to carry out certain functions or perform certain services in the interest of the populace. So there's various scholarly views that are tied to the reason why public establishments exist. There are reasons, there are also attributes to explain further the relevance of it when you consider how field offices operate. You also recast your mind back to the last lecture. We're able to look at issues of centralization and decentralization. And these are some of the things you would find relevant when you discuss public administration or public enterprises, because they are mostly established for specific purposes. And in most cases, they are set up in strategic locations to enable them perform services that ordinarily cannot be gotten from the center. Because imagine if everybody will have to come to the state capital or make reference to the state capital in everything that is to be done, you would find that administration will become very cumbersome, to have a lot of trouble, and a lot of persons will not be positioned enough to reach the center. So most times, these public enterprises have their various offices in the component units of the state or their field offices in different locations within the country, and they render services in the overall interest of the purpose for which they were established. And as we go further, you will find out why government set up these public enterprises across various environments. So for the purpose of this course, we said that generally speaking, a public enterprise is an agency of the government through which the government manages its commercial and economic activities. So if you look at this definition now, it has been set or laid clearly that public enterprises are mostly owned by the government, or the government controls a larger share of it. First, for the purpose of rendering very critical services to the citizenry that if left in the hands of the private sector, they might not be able to afford it. So the government steps in to establish these public enterprises, and through that, they reach out to the bulk of the populace. According to S.S. Kera, by state undertakings, is meant the industrial, commercial, and economic activity carried on by central government or by a state government or jointly by the central government and state government, and each either solely or in association with private enterprises, so long as it is managed by a self-contained government. Remember, I said earlier on that if not entirely owned by the government, then it therefore means that the government controls a larger share of the public enterprise in themselves. And the purpose for it is that the government will be able to reach out to its agricultural or commercial concerns, which are owned wholly or in part and controlled by the state. So this definition has been able to establish the fact that it is specifically owned by the government, either through shares or partnership with the private sector, but with the larger share controlled and managed and regulated by the government. And we have seen to an extent why they are established. And the purpose is basically to render services of public interest. To Hansen, public enterprise means state ownership and operation of industrial, agricultural, financial, and commercial undertakings. So all these definitions points to a single factor, which is basically that public enterprises are owned by the government, or these shares are legally owned by the government, and the purpose is to render public good. So Friedman defines public enterprise as an institution operating a service of an economic or social character on behalf of the government, but as an independent legal entity, largely autonomous in its management public accountability and subject to some directives by the government, equipped on the other hand with independent and separate funds of its own, and the legal and commercial authorities of the commercial enterprise. This statement has a lot embedded in it. And it first points to the fact that in as much as it is owned by the government, it has a legal status and it has an internal operating mechanism that is built around the structure that we looked at in the previous class, which revolves around the aspect of leadership and control and the chain of command that exists in them. And we looked at in the last class the issue of public bureau type of administration and then the board type of administration. And we're able to see that the bureau type vests power in various departments. In other words, decisions are not taken by a single individual or a single department, but that they jointly advise and then a particular position is taken. So the issue of leadership within the public enterprise is not vested in a single individual, in as much as you can have a chief executive, but there are other advisory bodies that revolve around the establishment or the internal structural arrangement of these public enterprises. So also there's issue of public accountability, and then there's issue of funding. That's why you can hear that some aspects or some agencies or some parastatals derive their monies or their funding from the consolidated revenue account. In other words, there is a particular account set up for the financing of the operations of these public enterprises, other than the regular budgetary arrangements that we see for a lot of other agencies. So also, it can be sued and can also sue, which is the legal aspect of it. And it is this legal aspect that gives it recognition to operate within the ambit of the law, in as much as it is established to render services of public nature. In short, public enterprise is an activity of the government, central, state, or local, involving manufacturing or production of goods. So it is not just the central government or the public or the federal government alone that can establish a public enterprise. Some can be owned by the state, others can also be owned by the local government, or in some cases you would find both the central government and the state government enterprise. But the hallmark of it is and how best to carry a creative structure of the government. Of political and administrative structure, it possesses a sound blending of public purpose, public accountability, autonomous functioning, and inherent rights to manage and control the enterprise by the government. So having said that, there are types of public enterprises. Public enterprises are divided into 4 types based on the ownership, namely central government enterprises like Nigerian Airways, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Nigerian Steel Company, in as much as the government to a large extent has handed over the management of these various public enterprises to the private sector. They still control what is called holding capital, more than 51%, or at best 51% of the share capital of these organizations, of these enterprises. So in as much as they operate like private companies now, they still render services at a more subsidized rate to the citizens. And that is why it is considered to be public enterprises. State government enterprises like the State Transport Corporation also exist. Then there is joint enterprise of both the central and the state government, which is further to buttress the point I was trying to make earlier on that in some cases you would find it jointly owned by both the state and central government. But the particular purpose for the establishment can even be to trigger development in some parts of the country and to take administration closer to the people. So it is not entirely at the behest of private ownership, but it is of a public character and a public nature to ensure that the purpose of the government for establishing it is achieved. So in furtherance of that, William Robson divides them into 7 categories. Remember, we mentioned the types and we just pointed at 4. Let me take your minds back. That first, it can be based on ownership. You know the nature of the public enterprise that is established in such a place. And we have been able to establish also that state government can also own public enterprises. Local government can equally own public enterprises, and they can be jointly owned by both state, federal, and local governments as well. So for this scholar, he divides it into 7 categories on the basis of the nature of their activities. So the first that we looked at now is the nature of ownership. Then this one now is the nature of the activities. And he said that they are categorized into public utilities like water, electricity, gas, ports, and harbors, transport and communication like railways, airlines, shipping lines, telephone, post, and telegrams, etc. Then banking, credit, and insurance like the Central Bank of Nigeria, financial corporations, multipurpose projects like an example from the United States of America, basic industries like coal, mining, iron and steel, shipyards, new industries or services, cultural activities like the Film Corporation Board of Nigeria and all that. But what this is simply saying is that owned by private individuals. Because first, they require so much resources to establish them. And even if they're able to be established by private individuals, you would have to pay excessively to be able to reach, to get those services. In other words, it's going to be unaffordable for the citizens of the country. And that is why governments step in to establish these enterprises, or in sometimes they partner with the private sector to have these services rendered at an affordable rate. Take, for instance, if one is to maybe operate a railway line, to be difficult for private individuals to afford them, or maybe airlines. In as much as we see private players in this sector, it is still on the premise of government intervention and regulation that they are affordable. And that is why we have these various organizations categorized under public enterprises and the reasons why they exist. So having said that, we have in this course now a segment that addresses the reason for the establishment of public enterprises. And we said that government intervention of a positive kind in the ownership, operation, and regulation of public enterprises and public utility services has today become all comprehensive and varied. These undertakings have served as a powerful instrument for achieving social and economic development. Remember, when we were talking earlier on, I made mention of some ideas that underline or serve as an undertone for the establishment of this organization. And I said that it could be for the purpose of development of specific areas of the country, or to take administration closer to the people. It might also be to raise some aspect of resources, revenue, to use in the development of other critical sectors that will serve the public good and provide basic needs for the citizenry that, if left in the hands of private individuals, would be difficult for the citizens to benefit from them. And without basic infrastructural facilities like roads, dams, railways, energy, and means of communication, economic growth would not have been possible. So imagine the costs that it would have if people are to establish dams on their own, or even run road constructions on their own. So there's the need always for the government to manage these critical areas. And that is why in other texts, you would find the issue of centrally planned economies faring better than when they are left in the hands of private individuals. And we have also seen that these core capitalist countries that lay claim to free market forces to decide what happens in the economy sometimes imbibe the culture of this centrally planned economy, and they have public enterprises established in their environment. So public enterprises basically is an element of a centrally planned government. And the purpose for it is to drive development and to meet the basic needs of the citizenry. In other words, that they can afford certain services that the private individuals cannot perform effectively. These activities are not undertaken by the private sector, as its sole concern is profit motive. If they are to be left in the hands of private individuals, the purpose first would be to make profit. So they don't care about the welfare needs of the people. But owned by the government, and they are able to render services. And in some cases, even if they pay for those services, it is at a very reduced rate. And that is why we hear issues of subsidy here and there. And when they talk about subsidy removal, we see how the country reacts to it, because it therefore means that the things you used to afford more easily you now pay more for it to get those services. So if they are to be left in the hands of private individuals, nobody will bother if you can afford it or not. All they will be concerned about is profit maximization. And that is why public enterprises are different from private enterprises. The growth of public enterprises is influenced by various factors like need for the nation, defense consideration, political and social philosophy, and the state of economic development. So you see the underlying principles that trigger the establishment of these public enterprises, like we have seen here. First is the need of the nation. There are certain very critical services that when they are found within an environment, it therefore shows that such a country is making tremendous progress. And that is why we continue to clamor. Take the power sector, for instance. Today there is power, tomorrow there's no power. And we continue to grapple with that because if it is left solely in the hands of private individuals, we might not even be able to afford it at all. Like a particular issue going on in the country now is the issue of removal of subsidy from the tariffs that is being paid for these electricity services. And I think there's the argument that it will be taken from 68 naira to 200 and something naira. So you can imagine the astronomical growth in that. And it's going to have consequences on the citizens. So the government established these things for various reasons. The need of the nation, defense consideration. Imagine if our military is owned and operated by private individuals. It will be difficult to even regulate them. It will be difficult for one to afford security in that aspect. So there are also political and social philosophy that guides the establishment of these public enterprises. In Nigeria, the following reasons justify government participation in economic activities. Need for sound industrial base. So one of the reasons for having public enterprise is the need to have a sound industrial base. Nigeria was economically backward during the colonial rule. After the independence in 1960, the task of this economic reconstruction was vast. Huge capital investment was required to build dams, provide infrastructure for industrial growth, and provide public utility services to people. That could be done by the government only. Remember, we earlier mentioned that if these critical aspects of the economy are left in the hands of private individuals, first, they might not even have the funds to establish them because they require huge capital investment to set up these public enterprises. And even when they are able to afford it, it will now mean that the citizens will pay dearly for it, which they might not have the resources to equally afford it. And that is why there's the need for the government to own and establish these various public enterprises. Also, modern economy is a planned economy. It is believed that the success of a planned economy depends on the growth of public enterprises. Planning is of particular significance for Nigeria, where a lot has to be achieved with limited resources and within a limited time. Remember, I talked about the argument for the centrally planned economies as against the argument for the free market economy. And we're able to look critically that particularly the countries that gained independence in the 60s, the newly independent countries, they didn't have the resources to have operated a free market economy. So there was the need for the government to run a centrally planned arrangement. And that is where the idea of the establishment of public enterprises was gotten. And we have seen also that if it were to be in the hands of private individuals, it would basically be for profit maximization, and it will not help in having a developed economy. So modern economy has to be a planned economy. The national responsibility of planning is something which cannot be discharged by any authority other than the government. According to A.H. Hansen, public enterprise without a plan can achieve something. A plan without public enterprise is likely to remain on paper. So what his position is trying to establish here is that the relevance of public enterprises cannot be overemphasized when one looks at the overall development agenda that is to be pursued within a system. Then also, another idea behind the establishment of public enterprises is to have a balanced growth within the country. Since the private sector does not take any interest in the establishment of industrial base, including development of key and basic industries, and since it has no social interest in promoting balanced regional development, it sets up industry only in such areas where it is profitable to do so. The government has to take up the task of nation building and ensure balanced regional growth of the country by providing infrastructure and facilities in backward regions. What this statement is trying to say is that by virtue of the fact that an economy is built around balanced development to be spread across different aspects of the country. The government only can have that power, that resources, not considering the extent of profit that can be made, and will cite industries in areas that would bring further development to the people, not putting profit as the basic desire for that. But if it is left in the hands of private individuals, there are some places that some things will not exist because they will consider it that they cannot make enough profit from those areas. As such, they will not want to cite those industries in those areas. But when they are government owned, take for instance, maybe universities, the government can decide to set up university in a very remote area, and the purpose will be to render services to the people. But if you look at how these private universities exist, they are built in places where they can easily make profit, and it will be in the interest of those that own such businesses. Take, for instance, you see power stations built, some in Niger, some in Ogun State and other places. If left in the hands of private individuals, maybe the concession will be in Abuja, Lagos, and other areas where they can make maximum profit. But this, when it's owned by the government, it is the duty of the government, and it becomes a burden on the government to establish these various industries or establishments in various places, first to meet the needs of the people in those areas and to spread development across the country. That is the argument for this balanced growth as one of the drivers of the establishment of public enterprises. Another one is commitment to building a secular society, still tied to the issues of balanced growth or balanced development. So when you have a government that cares about even development, there is the need to establish these public enterprises in areas that will trigger development, not necessarily for profit making, but to take administration and the benefits of government closer to the people. The government is committed to build up a secular socialist society in Nigeria. Therefore, it is increasingly compelled to enter directly into industrial and commercial activities. Needs for funds. The government needs funds for its diverse welfare activities. By active participation in business, the state can get money in the form of profits, which may be used by it to discharge the new and heavier burdens of the welfare state. Remember, we talked about the aspects where even if the government does not entirely own these public enterprises, or they raise little revenues from these public enterprises, they deploy the benefits that are gotten from them into providing more welfare services for other areas of critical sectors of the economy. Take, for instance, the issue of subsidy removal that we experienced with petroleum products recently. You can see that more revenue has been gotten from that angle and deployed to states to still provide services to the citizens in other aspects, in as much as there's increasing dissatisfaction with the subsidy removal. It affords the government more resources to establish maybe more roads, maybe better welfare packages in workplaces, better road construction and other infrastructural facilities that will still be in the interest of the state. That is what this argument is putting forward here, that government can establish these public enterprises and then the citizens pay little or almost nothing for it. And the little resources that is gotten from the businesses that the government does with these private enterprises is also used to pursue further development in the interest of the state. Take, for instance, NEPA, when it was solely owned by the government. The government was providing those services and collecting almost very little funds from it and used to develop other areas. Take the railway, for instance. The government owned these railway tracks and the machines that they use on it, and they raise revenues from it and use that to develop other aspects of the state. So in other words, the government sometimes engage in these commercial activities to raise revenue to fund other aspects of the economy. And that is where the budget of the country comes in as well. Sometimes these revenues are generated to support the funding of the state's budget. Socio-political factors. A government committed to certain social and political philosophy may well decide to intervene in the economic activity. The political philosophy of socialism may lead a country to nationalize certain enterprises such as the banks, air transport, and coal mines. The social purposes may include development of weaker sections of society. like I said earlier on, the resources are gotten to develop other aspects of the society. And we have seen that they can be used to also pursue the benefits of children and women welfare and so many other aspects that guarantees an even development in the country. In a survey undertaken by the United Nations, it was found that the factors determining a government's attitude towards public enterprises are in part ideological and in part pragmatic. That is why you see during periods of campaigns, you see people making promises. Oh, I will build roads. I will pay more salaries. I will bring development to the various sectors of the state and the country at large and all. And it is on this premise that public enterprise has become a tool for political campaigns for politicians as well. So in other words, it is not just ideological, but it's also a way to gain the support of the people when they know that a particular government will bring development to their environment. Organizations of public undertakings. In general, there are three main forms of organization of public undertakings, namely departmental concerns, government companies, and public corporations. So beyond all that we have mentioned that are the reasons for the establishment of public enterprises, there are also the aspect of public undertakings. And we have seen that there are three main forms of organizations of public undertakings, like we have seen departmental concern, government companies, and public corporations. In addition, there are other forms also which are being used for management of economic type of activities. Below, we briefly outline the characteristics of the three main forms of organization. The first is government companies. Professor A.H. Hansen, in his book entitled Public Enterprises and Economic Development, has defined the term state company as an enterprise established under the ordinary company law of the country concerned, in which the government has a controlling interest through its ownership of all or some of the shares. The main characteristics of the government company are as below. What this is simply saying is it boils down to what we have been discussing, that in some instances, the government, if not wholly owning these public enterprises, they own a higher share or the controlling share of the company. And as such, these companies are under its regulation and control. And they influence the management and the purpose for its establishment to serve the interest of the people. And the characteristics involves the fact that it has most of the features of a private limited company. The whole of the capital stock, or 51% or above, is owned by the government. So this is the aspect of joint ownership, which might be with the private sector or with the state or local government. And like I said earlier on, they control the larger share of such companies. And by that, they regulate the activities of the companies to serve the purpose for which they are established. All the directors, or majority of them, are appointed by the government, depending on the extent to which private capital is participating in the enterprise. So, because the private sector controls also to a considerable extent some numbers of shares within the establishment of such public enterprises, they act and play their roles as though they are privately owned, but the managerial cadre of it is subjected to various appointments by the government. That is why you have, in some places, you have MDs of these enterprises. They are appointed by the government in power, and then some directors in such organizations are also appointed by the government in power. So it is more like an arrangement where the private sector plays very active role, but the managerial cadre of such an establishment is controlled by the government. It is a corporate body under a general law, which is the Companies Act. It can sue and be sued, enter into contract and acquire property in its own name. This is more of the internal mechanism of such establishment and how they relate with the external environment as well. And they all operate under the status of the law. That is why you can find in some cases that some organizations are suing some individuals for a particular purpose, and the individuals can equally sue the government. So it gives it this legal backing and presents it as a corporate status before its external environment as well. It is created by an executive action of the government without parliament's specific approval having been obtained, and its articles of association, though conforming to an act, are drawn up and are revisable by the government. you can find in some instances where the government will make an appointment and then sometimes just submit the names to the National Assembly for ratification or for approval, but not necessarily to guide the government in such positions. We have seen situations where maybe some appointments are made and then there will be dissatisfaction from the Senate that angle, but the government will insist on such a person or such a position being maintained by who the government of the day at his discretion has put in charge of such a position. So that is how government enterprise exists. They are they are existing on the approval of the Senate, and in some cases, even without the approval of the Senate, the president or the person in charge has the prerogative right to set up or to choose the managerial cadre or the board that will manage such an establishment. That is why you see that the president can pick anybody from anywhere and make the person the head of any parastatal or any organization with little need for approval from the National Assembly. That is what this statement is simply saying, that approval having been obtained and each article of association, though conforming to an act, are drawn up and are revisable by the government. In other words, even if the lawmaking body is not comfortable with such an appointment, the government can still insist and have its way around it. That is why, as we go further, maybe you will see issues that relate to veto power of how the executive operates. Its funds are obtained from the government and in some cases from private shareholders and through revenues derived from the sale of its goods and services. So you can see that they have we earlier mentioned the consolidated revenue account and then other accounts of the government that are used to manage these public enterprises. That is why this statement here now is saying that the government can fund it. It can also raise funds from the private shareholders, because if the government owns 51%, it therefore means there's 49% that is owned by the private sector and can be sold to other private individuals. And from there, revenues can be generated to invest it further in other critical sectors of the country. And it can also render services. We made mention of NEPA in those days, that render services and collect money. And from that money, they use setting up other aspects of the government to pursue developmental agenda. It is generally exempted from the personnel, budget, accounting, and audit laws and procedures applicable to government departments. So this also goes to buttress the point that we made earlier on, that its funding is basically from the government and operates differently from the regular accounting and budgetary arrangements that other government establishments would have to submit and gain approvals for and all that. In as much as it is often subjected to various checks by the government, its funding is from a special provision by the government because of the critical nature of the services that they render to the society. Its employees, excluding the deputations, are not civil servants. The government company may be wholly owned, partially owned, and jointly owned as well. A wholly owned company is one in which the entire share capital is invested by the government itself without any participation from the public. A partially owned is one in which the government invests at least 51% of the share capital, the remaining parts coming from the public. A joint sector company is one in which both the public and private investments have taken place and where the state takes an active part in direction and control. We have explained this over time, and the whole idea is that government can own a public enterprise on its own sector, but will have the commanding or the controlling share capital, and it can be jointly owned by both the state, the federal government, and can equally make money from the private sector as well. That is where the issue of ownership now decides on the nature of the public enterprise that is established. It is a mixed enterprise of government and some other private entrepreneurs like Shell, BP, and Liver Brothers. The government reserves the power to control and supervise, while the private enterprise carries on with the work of production and management. The government may adopt the company form of organization for three reasons. What this statement is simply saying is that in a situation where the government runs such public enterprises, in collaboration with the state or with private individuals. It provides the resources and can control or monitor or regulate why the day-to-day activities are performed by the other partners that have come up to establish such an arrangement. And they say that there are three reasons why it is managed in that direction. And we say that it may have to acquire shares of an existing enterprise in response to a financial or economic crisis, or in order to maintain a nationally important production or service, which has become unprofitable or insolvent under private enterprise. What this is saying simply is that in some cases, the government steps in to acquire a company that is in crisis, that is not performing. I think we have it's called AMCOM in Nigeria that acquires the share capitals of a country, of a company that is struggling financially or that is found wanting in some aspects. So the government, when they observe that these particular organizations perform critical functions, and if they allow for the collapse of it, it's going to affect the general populace, they step in quickly to take over the control and management of such an establishment. That is what this statement is simply saying, that government sometimes steps in to acquire shares of an existing enterprise in response to a financial or employment crisis, or in order to maintain a nationally important production or service which has become unprofitable or insolvent under private enterprises. So in other words, where the private sector is found wanting, the government can step in and take ownership of such a business to guarantee that it continues to operate in the interest of the populace. We have seen that happening in so many sectors of the Nigerian economy. There was a time we had banks that were struggling. Government injected funds into those banks to ensure that they stay afloat and do not cause any hardship or crisis for those that have invested in such a business. We have also seen large corporations, hotels, and other forms of businesses that the ANCOM have taken over from private ownership, and the government running those businesses in the interest of the nation. The state may wish to launch an enterprise in association with certain other interests, national or foreign. The government may wish to start an enterprise entirely as a public concern in order to put it on its fact, with the intention of disposing of all or parts of it to the public or to specific private interests as soon as possible. What this statement is simply saying is that the government always plays the role of intervening into the establishment of this organization, or even taking over these public enterprises, just as a way to show that the government is still capable of carrying all interests along and maintaining the status of a developed society. Because if they allow private individuals to run some of these businesses and they make certain levels of profit, they can decide to take such resources out and invest in other areas, allowing for the collapse of some of these businesses. So the government quickly, when they see the need that such an organization is to stay afloat, the government takes over and manages the affairs of those companies to ensure that they continue to provide the services that they are known for. I'm glad that we have so many persons online today. And I think beyond this lecture, we'll be able to have our WhatsApp group and other members can participate. So the advantages that are associated to these government companies is that the other advantage of a company organization are convenience, information, flexibility, and freedom in operation, less burden of capital on the state, cooperation from the private sector, better discipline than under a departmental organization, professional management, suitability for commercial trading, and other similar activities, and opportunity to get foreign collaboration. In view of the advantages, the company form of organization is very popular within the government. So you can see the various benefits attached to these various establishments owned by the government, that it gives room for convenience, it provides more capital for the states to run other organizational arrangements, and its commercial trading activities raises revenue also that can equally bring in foreign investors to further boost various aspects of the economy. So the relevance of the establishment of these organizations cannot be overstated. However, it suffers from certain limitations or disadvantages. And we said that the most conspicuous disadvantage is that it evades constitutional responsibility which a state-owned enterprise has has to the parliament in a democratic country. Remember, like I said earlier on, that it does not necessarily require the entire approval of the National Assembly for such an establishment to be put in place. So, as such, it is trying to say that it invades the constitutional responsibility of proper supervision by the National Assembly. And that, to a large extent, negates a democratic tenet within the country. It is created by an executive action, and funds are provided from the consolidated funds without any prior parliamentary sanction and any accountability or control. Therefore, it is subjected to or has the tendencies of corrupt practices. Like I said, their funding is not within the regular budgetary arrangement, but can be funded from wherever the government deems fit to raise revenue to fund such an organization without approval of the parliament or the National Assembly as we have it in Nigeria. So it can be subjected to some measures of abuses that would not be in conformity with the overall interest of the society. Professor Robson called it a device for avoiding public accountability and control. But the fact that it is not under the control of the legislative body of the country and can operate at the very discretion of the executive cadre, it therefore means that it can evade public accountability because its ownership and management and control and funding is by the central government or the executive government, as the case may be. Secondly, a government company remains under the control and influence of the minister for industries and is subject to the same political pressure, pulls, and party interests as a departmental organization. We have seen in other literature about the establishment of public enterprises of this nature that the government sometimes use them as a reward arrangement for party loyalists. And that is why you can see that the chief executive, in most cases, owes his allegiance to the government that have put such a person in power. So they evade the checks and the supervision that ordinarily should exist by other arms of government. It does not enjoy any autonomy. In the words of Professor Ramaphan, it is apparent an autonomous agency, but the articles of association are so framed and the board so constituted that government influence can be easy and extensive. In other words, the government decides on how these public enterprises are managed. And as such, the allegiance of whoever is the chief executive or the MD or the minister owes his or her allegiance to the government or the person that has put or influenced such an appointment in the benefit of the person in control. So it is not entirely an avenue where other arms of government can supervise or superintendent above them, but rather it's an arrangement where the allegiance of such an establishment is owned to the government power. We see that happening in Nigeria, where anybody can be called to become the MD or the DG or the minister of an organization without the right channels of subjecting them to excessive scrutiny for public interest. So they are appointed at the discretion of the president or whoever is in control. In this unit, in conclusion, in this unit, we have dealt extensively on public enterprises, the meaning, concepts, types, and most importantly, the reason, that's the why for public enterprises. It is also pertinent to remind ourselves that various public undertakings we have vividly discussed, especially their merits and demerits, their limitations, etc. In the next unit, however, we shall yet again be discussing public operations, the traditional unit of administration, a publicly owned enterprise that has been chartered under federal, state, or local law for a particular business or financial purpose. In summary, government involvement in public enterprises and utility services has today become all-encompassing and varied, serving as they do as a powerful instrument for achieving social economic development. However, public enterprises have both the merits and demerits, but nevertheless, the company form remains the most acceptable form of organization of public enterprises, especially being favored for its substantially commercial function. So, having said all that, the idea here discussed today revolves around the fact that government established these public enterprises with the sole aim of meeting the needs of the populace and not with the idea of maximizing profit as it would have been if left solely in the hands of private individuals. So government establishments of this nature render services of public interest alone. So having said that, I will now give room for whoever has questions or contributions to make. And like I said earlier on, kindly inform other members of the class. Okay, please, we need the Zoom link. Yes, you'll get the Zoom link. It's always posted on the site, but it will be easier if we have a WhatsApp arrangement that we can always post a lecture link. And also, very importantly, you should study your course material and bring up questions so that we can address them properly before your exam time. And I would also ask that we are able to have extra classes so that we can meet up with the times that we have lost so far. So having said that, the floor is now open for questions and contributions from those of you available. Okay, Comfort.
Okay, good morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you for the facilitation, sir. So we want to know the day we'll be having this course, but because we have been trying to get information from the email, from the virtual learning platform, we couldn't get information. Even the link to join the class is not on the subject something, the email, the virtual learning, the course itself, that is 326. Please help us to look into. Many people want to join, but they are complaining that they can't get the link. And the link that I eventually use in the waiting room, I saw business enterprise. So I tried to ask questions. It's one of us that later told me that that's the topic that we are treating. So many people, that thing kind of mislead them that maybe it's entirely, sir.
Well, what you have said now is the reason why we are slightly behind other courses at the moment. And when we started, we had issues of having this particular course on the site. Rather, it was showing previous lectures. The sessions that we had 2-3 years ago was what was showing on the platform. So before that was resolved with the IT unit, it took some time.
Okay.
So, and then the email addresses, because all the student email addresses somehow appear on the site. And each time we send mails out, they return as failed deliveries. So I just don't know. I have complained to the people in the IT unit to also look at the email addresses. If there are issues within them that can be resolved, fine. And I've also looked at from my own end to be sure that I'm not the one making the mistake. And so far, it's not from my end. So that is why I have been dropping my WhatsApp line so that I can be added to your class WhatsApp group if there is one. And then you students should inform other members of the class. The link is on the site. The lectures will always be posted. And if I have a WhatsApp line that a WhatsApp group that I can be a member of, it will be easier to mobilize people to have the lecture running. However, the aspect of the email, I would ensure that it is resolved from the school so that when emails are sent out, you people would get the notification for it. Sorry, you are breaking.
One of us. That's why we are able to know that something. Can you hear me, sir?
Okay, can hear you now, yes.
I said one of us created the group. That's why we are able to know that the class is going on. Maybe she has sent the link to different groups so that people can join. Maybe she can take it up. You can give her your number, sir, so that when you are in the group, you can send the link to us and people keep on joining the group, sir.
Okay, my WhatsApp line is 080.
Okay.
36 11
36
11 32 43
32 43 0036 113243.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Let Francisca note that.
Okay, that's fine. So any question, any contribution, any suggestion on how to get the class running effectively? Can speak up. I think we still have Oh, just a minute left. Okay. Please, you're an admin. Okay, that's right. That's this guy to everyone. Okay. All right. So for now, we'll be okay. Someone wants to say something? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, sir. You talk about how to make up for the time that we have lost. So maybe you plan for that against next class. Or once you are in the group, you can let us know the time that you want to come out to take us again, so that we can cover all the topics that we
Okay,
have not been able to do, sir.
okay, that's fine. That's fine. And then the benefit of the WhatsApp group from previous experience is the fact that you can bring up your questions easily, and I am
Yes.
available to attend to them all. You can read through past questions, prepare yourself better for your exams, and come up with wherever you think you need clarification. I will always
All
be
right.
available. So it's easier to reach you all through the WhatsApp group than this regular weekly arrangement.
Okay, thank you,
So
sir.
when I'm added up, then we'll now discuss whenever it's convenient again. If it's tomorrow, if it's any other time before the official time for the class. I think the official time for this class is every Wednesday from 6 to 7. But we'll need to
Yeah.
have other classes in between.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you too. So any other person with any contribution, or should we call it a day?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Francisca, I
Okay,
can hear you.
yes, sir. I want to suggest that the class can be holding by this time that we had it every Friday. It will also be good. And to my fellow students, Madam Okay, she's also an admin on the platform. I think she can take it up from there, but she manages other platforms.
Okay, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. Okay, so we should start considering Wednesdays and Fridays, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
okay. For the fact that I'll be on the WhatsApp group with you people, it will be easier for us to discuss there and then fix any time that's convenient.
All right, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, enjoy the rest of the day.
I used to say bye.